Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I got some new blooms and some spikes and buds to look at today. But before I do that, a little history lesson, because I've had inquiries and there's some stories as well. Specifically, how long have I been growing orchids? Well, 50 years, but not really. Not when you really look at it. I had an orchid at college, which is a long time ago. And I've had orchids around the house. Now you could say fundamentally Phalaenopsis. And they grew okay, they bloomed now and again. They were not of a high interest. To me, they were a house plant. And during those times, there were lots of other house plants as well. You know, the sort of cheese plant and rubber plant and spider plant and pelargoniums that work okay indoors. They don't all, but some do. And fuchsias and all sorts of things. Always had an interest in plants. And some orchids dotted around as house plants, nothing more. No interest in the actual subject or anything like that. And when I moved into this house, which must be about 10 years ago now, which is my mum's house, not mine, a lot of the house plants got left behind when I moved. They got given to other people because I didn't know how much space I had, because you know, my mum's house was a fully furnished house and I had to get some of my furniture in as well that I wanted to keep, and so I didn't know how much room I would have, so a lot got gone. But I kept the orchids that I had at the time, and then the interest sparked, I suppose, and I started getting a few more. Nothing more than windowsill growing. That was all, just plants dotted around various windowsills. And the only orchid I had that wasn't a Phalaenopsis back in those days was a Shari Baby, which was a spur of the moment purchase based on wandering around a garden centre with my 3 youngsters, wondering what the hell this smell of chocolate was. We thought they actually had a chocolate fountain and you could get a cup and have a cup of chocolate. That's what we thought, because the smell was so strong. We eventually tracked it down to this Shari Baby orchid, so I bought it. And you know, it scented the dining room, which was where all the computers were and everything, so that's where I spent a lot of my time, and it was smashing. And yeah, and then I got a Catlettia and tried that again on a windowsill, and that's really where it sort of started, growing a few orchids dotted around the house, but still not the sort of passion I've got now. And really, it only really started when I converted this conservatory into a grow room, which took a lot of faff in the beginning, because one, I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, for an example, this place was just unbearably hot in the summer and too cold to even come out here in the winter, kept sealed tight to stop the cold coming in the house. So it was useless for plants. I started with shade netting, and that reduced the temperature a bit. I was working in late spring, I believe, trying to see if I could adapt it to get plants in here. And layer of shade netting helped a bit, but not good enough, still far too warm. So second layer of shade netting and a layer on the roof. That dropped the temperature a bit, and it was becoming bearable for me to be in, but it was still too warm and dry really to start thinking about putting orchids out here. And eventually I got some circulating fans to move the air around, and suddenly it started to feel a bit more like it. I was saying, right, we're getting there now, but on sunny days it was still too warm really, and that's when I had the idea of an extractor fan. Because there's no windows in this place. The only window I had at the time was rotten, so if you opened it, it fell apart. It just fell off. You had to put it back together and jam it shut again. And the door doesn't open. That's jammed and locked. Don't even know where the key is, quite honestly. So, you know, I had no way of getting cooler air in. So that's when I had the idea of the extractor fan, but I had nowhere to put it. So basically I just came up with the idea of that was a window. yeah, which was useless. So I took the window out and put a wooden panel in. That got me an extractor fan, and that basically did the trick. That was the bit that got the hot air out, which was necessary. And then the idea sparked that, well, if I'm getting the hot air out near the top of the grow room, it would be nice to be able to suck in some cooler air. That needs to be low down, yeah. So that's when I had the idea of getting an inlet fan so that they could work together. Unfortunately, I had nowhere to put it because it was all glass. So basically, my son and I took that glass panel out, and just as we got it out, it decided to shatter. And we then spent the next 2 or 3 hours trying to clean up the mess. So you can't have shards of glass all over the place where, I mean, I'd walk around in barefoot a lot in the summer, even outside. So that had to be cleaned up really, really well. But that got me another wooden panel, which I could then cut a hole in. So that got the place sort of working, but the atmosphere was still too dry. So I got a couple of, not these type of foggers, but I got a couple of humidifiers. They were just ordinary household humidifiers. And that really did the trick. And then it was a matter of getting some shelves. I didn't have many at first. You have to bear in mind, this was a conservatory. It had a big sofa and a table and a chair. So I just had a few shelves along here. That's all I had at first. And then I put a few wires up and, you know, and then that started the collection, because then I had places to put plants that were empty. So I needed plants. So I started buying like mad. You know, pretty bloom must have. Oh, another pretty bloom must have. With very little thought about how I was going to look after them or whether they were even suited to the grow space. I don't do that now. But yeah, that's when it started. And that was only 4 years ago. Yeah, pause for shock horror. I can remember the point at which, while I was staying with Rachel over in Ireland, that came up in one of the videos. How long had I been growing seriously? And I said, oh, only about 4 years. And I think Rachel was taken aback a bit. And yeah, it is literally that the collection started about 4 years ago. So the seriousness, I only got serious quite a relatively short time ago. But I'm one of those people, if I'm interested in a subject, I will learn, and I learn fast. If I'm not interested in a subject, I find learning a real chore to the extent that I'd just rather not do it. You know, I've had times in my life where I've had to, you know, college and things like that, where you're learning about stuff you've got no interest in at all, and that is hard work. But when I'm interested in a subject, I'll get at it. And so the learning curve was dramatic. And that doesn't stop. That learning never stops. I've still got plants in here that I haven't done the work on. I haven't done the research. They're growing okay, so it's not strictly speaking necessary. Nonetheless, I've got probably 20 odd plants in here that I do now need to go and look up, because we're coming towards winter. And I need to know what they're going to need through the winter. Yeah, that's going to become more important. So I have got some work to do. I've still got some flipping tags to do as well. I am so lazy when tags are lost or misplaced, lost at shows, at actually replacing them. But in the main, I know what the plants are. So for me, it's not too bad. But it does catch me out frequently when I pick a plant up and I don't actually know what it is without going back to my notes. So that's just a quick sort of history. That's how I got here, where I am now. Along the way in those 4 years, actually probably, yeah, maybe a bit longer than that. Maybe it's 5 now. But I joined an orchid society, and then a couple of years ago I joined a second one. So I can now talk to other people that are growers. You know, that's a wealth of information as well. But the learning doesn't stop. There are some plants, like, let's say my Tolumnias, for instance. I don't need to know anything else about Tolumnias. I've done it. Done them to death. So I'm fine with those. I don't need to. Some of my Dendrobiums, I still need to look them up to find out where they come from, how high up they grow. Are they rainforest type orchids? Are they deciduous type orchids? Because that will explain a lot about how I need to look after them in the winter. Yeah. and there are still a few oddities lying around that I could do with putting a bit more effort in. But most of the time you get your first, like when I got my first Masdevallia, for instance, I had to go and do some work. You know, just how cool do these need to be? Do they all need to grow cool? Are there some that are more warmth tolerant as opposed to warm growers? There's a slight difference. You know, so I did a bit of work on the first one, but I didn't need to do that work for each one. I just did it as a general bit of work for the genus. But then you get real exceptions. You know, in amongst the Catlettia alliance, my Laelia anceps, that doesn't like heat. That's a cooler grower. Well, if I hadn't done the work, I wouldn't know that, and it would be stuck up on the high shelf in the heat, which it wouldn't grow as well. So little subtle differences. Yeah, right. Let's have a look at some spikes. The fact that I got this Oncidium, which people thought was treated a little harshly when I repotted it. Well, you make your own mind up. I was happy with what I did, and I'm happy with the result. And I have got quite a few more spikes with buds to come, so I'm happy with the result. And that actually got a good watering and a feed yesterday, because I haven't got a clue when that orchid was last fed. And this is obviously a bit of a drinker and a feeder to be able to grow as strong and vigorous as that. You know, that takes some input. Yeah. Some orchids just trickle along gently and don't need as much, but that one's going to be one of those that needs to be kept going. But on that front, bearing in mind this is one of the parents to the Twinkles, I've got three. This is the cinnamon one, and that's currently got 4 or 5 spikes in their infancy, because they do grow quite slowly, but there's quite a few spikes coming on that one. And tucked up the back there near the glass is the yellow one. That's got a couple of spikes. But what it's actually got is one growth that has just matured with a spike on both sides. Yeah, it's got other new growths that aren't mature yet, so there will be more spikes to come. That's the 2 potted Twinkles. And then my tiny Twinkle up here, which is mounted, that's got a spike as well, just the one at the moment, I think. I don't think there's any more. But again, it's maturing its growths at different times, and that's the first one to reach maturity enough to actually put a spike out. There are others to... Oh, actually, there's another spike there as well, 2. I bet if I look, I can find a third. Yep. This lowest one on the right has a spike near the top. The one on the right at the top there, that's got a spike, and that one out the side. So that's got at least 3 spikes, and possibly more to come. So all the Twinkles are now in spike, but don't hold your breath. The spikes take quite a while. Right, now if I can get at it, tucked up in here is... this is actually... come out. This is actually a little maxillaria. And it's a lovely little miniature plant. It's one of those that likes to explore the world around it and heads out of the pot and upwards and off in all directions, and has a habit of splitting. So the rhizome will produce a bulb like there and then head off in 2 separate directions. So it can become quite a large, almost straggly looking plant. Now it used to live on a mount. I decided to try it in a pot for a while. So I took some pieces off and potted them. But round here, hang on, I need 3 hands here again. There we go. We have some buds. So it's going to bloom. These are very small, orangey red flowers and attractive. I don't think they're fragrant. If they are, it's very faint. But we've got some blooms to come on that, and that's Maxillaria sophronitis. Sophronites, I believe, ES on the end, not IS. And I think that's probably the only Maxillaria I've got left now, because they all got sent off to other people. Especially the tenuifolia, because the one I had just grew absolutely enormous, and Danny had a large piece of that. I think she's still got that going, and several other people had a piece, and I didn't keep any for myself in the end, because the one I had for me, growing it here just didn't have the fragrance. There's no point in having the coconut orchid if you don't get the coconut fragrance. So I let mine go. And the other big maxillaria, I had the spidery one that had a virus, so that got rid of. What else was I looking at? Oh, I said I'd do. Some people are interested in the way the white vander is going to change. So you can see the change starting. Yeah, when it opens, it's a plain creamy white, and then literally after quite a short space of time, the tessellations start to show. So as you can see, they're just forming on this bloom now. They're in the background, they're not dominant, but they will take over and it will go much, much paler to almost white, and then it'll have those tessellations on it, which give it some interest. Otherwise it would just be quite plain. So yeah, but it happens literally, the tessellations start after about 3 to 4 days after it opens. It's sort of, once it gets flat, you know, it opens sort of cup shape. Once it gets flat, it will start producing the tessellations on the blooms. It makes it quite attractive. Oh, what else? What else? What else? Come on, think. I had all this in my head when I started. The Dracula bud is. This is going to be in the dark. It's hanging down in here behind the Spanish moss, but it's swelling now. So we will have a Dracula bloom not too far down the line. None of the Miltoniopsis have got blooms. I got a horrible feeling. My two little miniature Dendrobium Cuthbertsonii, I did have a bud on one, but I believe it's blasted, so I don't think we're actually going to see a bloom on that. I mean, those plants are still struggling. I keep them as cool as I can. They're growing in moss, which is what they're supposed to do, so I'm doing my best for them, but they don't seem to be taking off, even though there are a few new growths coming now. So hopefully that will produce more roots and better plants. They live up there. Basically, they're in the line of fire of that little computer fan, so they're under a constant cool breeze. They do grow cool, those, you know. So that was that. Oh, and the Tulumnia has opened. Well, that's just catching a little bit of sun there, so that's probably looking quite nice. It's only just opening, so the blooms aren't fully open yet. And that's Golden Sunray Sunrise, I believe, from memory. Another, I know it hasn't got a tag, there's no point in looking, but this is a very attractive Tulumnia, very attractive. It's got all the bright yellows, it's got veining on the base of the plant, deep red in the centre. This has got a lot going for it, this little bloom, very attractive. It's not my actual favourite, but it's probably next to it. But, that's that one. The other Tulumnia that's in bloom, this is going over now. It's already dropped one of the blooms, leaving two. And I don't think that one's going to branch. The plant isn't strong enough, really. It's still recovering, as are quite a few of the Tulumnias. Although most of them have made it now. And the next plant I'm going to have to dig out because it's right up the back. So I'll put the camera down for a minute. The other one is this little Catlettia is just opening. I don't think it's fully opened yet. I think it will become a little flatter. These bits will probably move back a bit. And this is quite an attractive combination of colours. Lovely deep yellow in the throat of the lip with a frilly edge with I'd say that was quite a deep purple. It's not red. And then the leaves again start, the petals, they start a yellow colour with veining and again a purplish tinge. So that's quite attractive. There's another bud to come on that spike and another spike coming on here. With that, looks like it's going to have 3 buds on that one. That's a first time bloomer. That's one of those with an 8-foot name. Catlettia Little Lemon Drops crossed with Catlettonia Why Not? And that's one of the relatively new acquisitions, so I'm pleased that it's managed to bloom this early in its life with me. But attractive little blooms. These are not large for Catlettias, but then this is not far off a miniature Catlettia. Sort of call it a midi, I suppose. It's not a mini, and it's not your giants like these flipping things. It's in between, so it's a nice compact plant that seems to be growing on really well now since it got put in the holy clay pots, chucking roots out all over the place, and has bloomed on the latest 2 growths. So that's good. And it's also good that it's growing in 2 directions. You know, so in theory there will be another 2 new growths to follow, maybe more. So in theory, again, there should always be 2 leads with 2 potential blooming pseudobulbs. So that's that. And that's all that's new, really. The Macae, that's a Brassocatlia Macae, that has got some sheaths that look like it's going to bloom. I wouldn't say there's loads for the size of the plant, but that plant's still relatively new here in this environment and had to have a change of climate in the root department, so it's still acclimatizing itself. But it's growing, it's got quite a few new growths on it, and there are signs of sheaths forming, so hopefully we'll get some blooms on that later down the line. The apple blossom, that blooms reliably. So every new growth, unfortunately I only get them 1 at a time, does actually bloom. And sometimes the buds come straight out without a sheath. Well, this time it's decided to do a sheath first, but the buds should follow quite quickly on that. They'll be following on behind. A bit of sad news, I've got a horrible feeling that this spike on my Laelia anceps has stalled. I don't think it's pushing on. Not sure. There is a second new growth on that one with a sheath that's still green, but I can't remember whether the sheath does that and then the spike pushes out afterwards. I just can't remember, but I may have a stalled spike there, not so sure. I'll have to wait and see, as usual. Wait and see. Yeah, so that's about it. I'll keep my eye on the new Brassavola acquisition, because there are spikes on there, but this thing's got to settle in. You know, that's just been taken out of that horrible coconut husk stuff and put on a mount. And initially that needs to be kept hydrated to make sure that doesn't dry off. But I'm keeping my eye on it. You know, should be doing well. I don't expect any of this sea green up here to be showing buds for about another 3 months, maybe 4. There's no point in even looking up there. Most of those up there are the winter resting types, so they're not going to bloom till late winter, early spring. So no point in looking up there. Yeah, my this is a bit unusual. My little Latoria type, Dendrobium rhodostictum, is not looking very happy as a plant, but each new growth has always bloomed, and it's gone from 1 bloom to 2, and now it looks like 3 or possibly 4 on that spike. But then over here on one of the old pseudobulbs, it's pushing a spike up from lower down, and I've been dying to get one to do this because I once upon a time said that, and several people said, well, I've never seen them do that, they always bloom from the apex, which they always have for me, but I'd seen pictures and now I've got one. So that bloomed out of the apex, this was the last growth to bloom, yeah, and now it's producing a spike from lower down below that top leaf, so they can do it. But the one I wanted to talk about was this one. This has both of these hybrids have got aberrans in them. This is a species Polysema crossed with aberrans, and this is noratakanaga crossed with aberrans. And from behind they look very similar until you look at the front of the blooms, and this one is incredibly plain. The front of the blooms have got hardly any markings on them at all. All the patterning is on the back of the blooms, which is very attractive viewed from above. Now this one is very attractive viewed from above, but this one's got the bonus of actually being attractive from the front as well. It's got that beautiful veining on the lip, yeah, and some of those spots from the back show through. So that's actually attractive. Even the buds are attractive on this, you know, before they even open. So yeah, so that's there's actually another Latoria type, which is one of those buried in there, that's actually got a spike coming. So that's 4 out of my Latoria types, so either in bloom or about to. So they're doing okay. And they do seem to do okay. This particular cross grows a bit like a weed. This has pushed up so many new growths this year. I've only got one problem on it. That. Now whether that caught the sun or suffered in the heat wave, I don't know. But on that one growth, that is a new growth, but it's suffered. And as a consequence, it may not produce a spike, even though it's a strong new growth. But it's grown a lot of new growths, all of which are effectively blooming. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they're all at it. So this is a nice prolific bloomer. And it's a not bad sized plant, doing quite good. This is a very small plant. This is losing some older leaves, and as a plant doesn't look that good. But nonetheless, it's bloomed on the latest 2 growths. Yeah? So that's okay. Now, the only other set of buds I've got that are going to take ages to grow are on the little Arengis fastuosa. You can see the 2 spikes just starting near the base of the plant. But they'll take quite a long time. That's probably not going to be in bloom till the spring. They really do take a long time to grow. But plant's doing well, and the side plant, it's grown a plantlet out of the side, and probably next year that will bloom as well. The main plant reliably produces 2 spikes. If that one can produce a spike as well, that'll be really good. But yeah, that's coming on nicely. The only other one that I really have to keep my eye on is this one up here. If you're going to come down. This is Encyclia or Epidendrum. Epidendrum, I think, nocturnum, and it's going to bloom. The bud now shows. I can see it. Now I've got to watch this little devil because it did actually bloom here. And do you know what? That's the old bloom spike. I do believe it's extending. I hadn't noticed that. It is. It's extending. Oh, now that spike's over a year old, and that spike bloomed, and the bloom lasted 1 day. It self-pollinated overnight. When I came in the next day, pleased as punch that I got it to bloom, ready to film it in all its glory, and the bloom had collapsed because it self-pollinated. That's this one's party trick. It is prone to doing that. But we do have an extension on that. That is unexpected. See, it's a good job I didn't cut the spike. And this one's obviously going to bloom as well. I do believe they only ever produce 1 bloom, but it is worth knowing that it's capable of shooting out again. So it effectively could be classed as a perpetual bloomer once you can get the thing to bloom. But I look at this every single day, because when that bloom opens, I've got to film it in case it self-pollinates again. I mean, I have a distant memory of what the bloom looks like simply because it only existed for 1 day and then it was gone. Well, I certainly don't want that, you know, not escaping the camera this time round. The other thing that's highly likely to spike is my giant Sailaja down here. Now, at the last Wessex show, Burnham's had several of these actually in bloom, so it's obviously around the right time of year. And this one has a lovely strong new growth here. It's pushing up another one round the back of the plant, which I wasn't expecting. And this is the latest new growth here. And looking at the ones from Burnham's, the spikes are produced well before the bulbs are anywhere near mature, and they come straight out the centre. Yeah, so I think we should be getting a spike on that in the not too distant future. It is blooming size, it's bloomed before, so there's no reason why it shouldn't again. But this new growth, that new growth and that new growth all came together. 2 bloomed, 1 didn't. So it is still possible that that could be a blind growth and not produce a spike, along with the others. But I would expect at least 1 spike to bloom. And the blooms on that are large, so it's classed as one of the large white Sailaja. There's a set of them, Cristatas one, and this is Moriana, with lots of bits after it, but it's basically Coelogene Moriana. And that is about it. There, as I say, quite a few of the Catlettias have got sheaths, but until I see buds poking out, there isn't really much to say, because you can't guarantee a Cattleya with a sheath is going to bloom. They don't always. Sometimes they're just blind and they don't. So we'll go from there. The Disas are still looking good in the sunshine there, still hanging on. They've lasted much better. The previous set of blooms back in the heat wave just keeled over. They only lasted a couple of weeks, whereas this one's been open some time now. Very late blooming for that particular type of Disa cuensis. Okay, I'll leave it at that today. The only watering I've got to do today is the mounts. And already autumn shows. When I watered my continuous growers, cooler growers down here, because I don't want them to get totally dry, their frequency of watering comes round a bit quicker than the other things in pots. But I was a day late watering my pots this week. They'd gone 7 days without any water, and as a consequence some were dry and some were still wet enough that they didn't get watered. So it's starting. Now, back in the heat and back in the summer with the long days, even if a plant looked still a little bit wet, it would still have got watered. But now we're getting to the time of year with the cooler nights. So I don't want things staying soggy wet and getting more water poured in there. So plants are starting to miss a run, which means they will go a fortnight. Because if they haven't used that water up in a week and they're still soggy, they need to dry off. So they'll go 2 weeks before they get watered. The mounts are now every 2 days with reasonable weather, every 3 days if it's like it has been recently, just dull and wet and miserable. That means there's no heat and nowhere near enough light. Now I have taken the shade netting off the roof and that's brightened it up quite a bit in here. And on the really dull days I do actually turn the light on. But obviously that's not getting at all the plants, it's just getting at some of them, which is better than none of them. So, and as soon as the other light arrives, I'll be totally rearranging everything in here and making this a grow room with lights. So on a day like today, no lights until it starts to get dark, and then just add that bit in to keep the 11-hour day length going. But on dull days, they can be on all day, and I'm quite happy to do that. So it's going to be a different winter this year. Never had lights before. Should be fun. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.